I'm glad you enjoyed breakfast. I made it to make up for the uncomfortable situation I'm about to put you in, Xander. The truth is, I really like you. I woke up to a tasty breakfast waiting for me in the kitchen. Would have been nice if it was made by someone I had hooked up with, but it was just Leo, my roommate. He was a good cook, so I happily ate the food he made me. Little did I know it came with a price. After saying this sudden line, he leaned back in his seat and sighed. Huh? I stared at him with my mouth full of pancake. Leo and I had been roommates for the past 4 years. We had lived in the same dorm from our first year of college, and now we were in his last. I knew him well. He was a country boy, not used to the big city. He was here at his private university on a scholarship, and I knew from how much he studied that he worked his butt off for that scholarship. He was quiet and soft-spoken, studious, and not a very spontaneous person. In other words, the Leo that was suddenly confessing his love to me was not at all consistent with the Leo I had known all these years. I swallowed my food. Wait, what do you mean, like me? I asked. I mean, I like you. I like you, Leo explained. His tan cheeks were a little red, but he didn't stop speaking. I have for a while. Didn't know whether I should tell you or not. I stared at him. Nope, I still didn't understand. You like guys? That was the first question I asked. Leo had always struck me as the straight-as-a-line type. I'd never really acknowledged it before because I've never liked a guy before, he said softly. But I like you now, so I've got to come to terms with it, I guess. Wait, hang on, I held up a hand. How long have you liked me? A year. A year? I couldn't believe it. Why do you like me? My second question. Here, Leo blushed. Well, your personality. You're relaxed in a way I can never be, and your looks, I guess. I was Leo's direct opposite. My parents were rich, so they could afford to send me to the school when I got by on C's. I went out to parties, drove around town for fun, and probably saw more social interaction in a week than Leo did in 6 months. We had absolutely nothing in common. Leo sighed. I know, he said, as if reading my thoughts. I'm really sorry, but this has been bothering me for ages now. I just need to hear your answer before we graduate, just so I can get it off my mind and get over it, once and for all. So it was one of those reject me so I can get over it kind of situations. I scratched the back of my neck. Even if I rejected him, he would still like me for a while, wouldn't he? I could tell his type of attraction was that pure puppy love attraction that stuck no matter what you tried to do. I couldn't imagine someone like Leo just liking someone on a purely physical level. I know he was looking for rejection so he could get over it, but having been in his situation before, I knew it wasn't as clean and simple as that. Feelings like that didn't just disappear the moment they weren't reciprocated, and the idea of spending the rest of my college days living with a guy who obviously liked me sounded so awkward I didn't even want to try it. And sure, Leo was a nice guy, definitely good looking, a good cook, but dating him? Out of the question. I didn't date, and a guy like him dating a guy like me was a recipe for disaster. I get it, I finally answered, but I'll need a few days to think about this. Process it a little, you know? I've never had someone tell me this kind of thing out of the blue. Leo blinked. Clearly, he had been expecting instant rejection. Well, I wasn't going to do that. Not when there was a much better option available for me. After a moment, Leo nodded. He had a comically serious expression on his face. All right, but can you give me your answer in a month? If you don't tell it to me straight, I'll be stuck thinking of all the possibilities, and I don't want to be thinking of that by the time tests start. I almost burst out laughing. Even when confessing his affection, he was still thinking about the most efficient way to study. Well, I would need up to a month to fix this situation. Later that day. I sat in my friend's dorm with all my close friends around me. We met up like this pretty often, usually with some gossip or updates on our lives. And boy, did I have an update for them. Leo? Megan sat up from where she had been lying with her head in my lap. You mean your cute roommate? The big guy? The very same, I said. Told me he's into me just this morning. Oh wow, if you don't want him, give him to me. You have even less in common with him than I do. Anyways, he's not gonna want me at all in a little bit. Megan arched a brow. He's not? Oh god, what are you going to do? I took a sip from my can of beer. I had to make sure not to drink too much. As much as I hated it, I knew I didn't hold alcohol very well. I'm gonna show him exactly why he shouldn't like me, I said, and make him lose all those feelings. Megan stared at me doubtfully. Do you really think you can do that? I mean, you guys have been roommates for years now. I'd assume he knows enough about you to actually like you. I smirked. I don't think he does. 3 days later. And so began my quest to become the most obnoxious roommate ever. It wasn't very hard. I knew a thing or two about purposely being annoying. I kept my music loud. Not outrageously loud, just loud enough for Leo to possibly be annoyed by it, but not so loud that he'd want to tell me to turn it down. I knew he wasn't a fan of confrontation. Leaving the cereal out after making a bowl, leaving a single dirty dish in the sink that I easily could have washed, just little things that I knew would chip away at his irritation. But if it did, he didn't show it. Actually, he didn't act like he had confessed anything to me at all. He moved around the dorm quietly, occasionally singing to himself, spending most of his time in his room studying. It was hard to get a read on him when he was just acting the same way as he always did. Well, it was, until a certain day. Hey, Leo? I stepped into the living room where Leo was seated on the couch, watching TV. Do we have any soap left? Leo glanced at me and his eyes widened. That was probably because I was wearing nothing but a towel around my waist. I got to see those deeply tanned cheeks of his gain some color. Come to think of it, he had always been a little awkward around me when I was wearing less clothing. I'd always assumed it was because he was used to modesty. But could it have been because he had a crush on me the entire time? Amused, I leaned against the door, waiting for him to recover enough to respond. I don't think we do, he finally said, looking away and standing up. I can head to the store and pick some up if you're willing to wait. I frowned slightly, setting a hand on my hip. What? You don't have to do that. I can just get dressed and go myself. It's fine, he insisted. I need to buy some supplies for myself anyway. He moved to grab his jacket off the rack. My frown deepened. Seeing him like this, so willing to help the person he liked, even if it would inconvenience him, it reminded me of something unpleasant. I pushed myself off the door and walked over, grabbing his arm. I said you don't have to, I said. Leo looked at me, surprised. Ignoring how painfully obvious it was that he was trying to keep his gaze on my face, I continued. You were watching TV just now, weren't you? Go do that. You don't have to drop everything just because I walked out here shirtless. Leo looked shocked. As soon as I processed the words I had said, I understood his surprise. After all, I had never spoken to him like that before. Whoops. There was an awkward beat before I let go of him and laughed. I'm just saying, if you keep acting like that, someone's gonna take advantage of you, you know? Leo looked away. You're already undressed. I just wanted to help you out. I don't see what the big deal is. I had to stop myself from sighing. Well, of course, he wouldn't see what the problem was. But having been in his place before, I knew how easy it was to lose yourself in trying to please someone you cared about. And I knew where that could lead you. Fine, I conceded, stepping away. If you want to do it that badly, then go ahead, and thanks. Still not caring to look in my direction, Leo shrugged on his jacket and left the room. I walked over to the nearby window just in time to see him jog out of the building. I frowned. It was clear he still liked me. It seemed I'd have to increase my efforts a little bit. Every evening, without fail, Leo shut himself in his room to study for several hours. I didn't understand how he chose to do that when there were so many things he could do instead, but it seemed like gaining knowledge was a genuine hobby of his. It was no wonder he was as smart as he was. Usually I left him alone unless I really needed something, but that night, I got an idea. Surely he would be irritated if I interrupted his special study time, wouldn't he? I knocked on the door. A few seconds later, he opened it. Sure enough, he had his reading glasses on, and I could see the pile of books on the desk in his room. Perfect timing. "Hey," I smiled up at him. "Are you busy?" I asked, even though it was obvious he was. Sure enough, his brow furrowed slightly. "Depends. What do you need?" I held up the textbook I was holding. "I've got a test tomorrow, and I can't understand any of this stuff. You're smart. Can you help me study a bit?" Interrupting his study time to ask him to help me study. Surely that would tick him off at least a little, especially since my test had nothing to do with his. To my surprise, though, he looked at my book with interest. Silent, he reached out and plucked it out of my hands, flipping through it quickly. I think I can," he said. "What chapter are you getting tested on exactly?" I stared at him in utter disbelief. Chapter 4? He quickly flipped to chapter 4 and scanned over the first page. "I think I understand this. Of course, this isn't my field of study, but if you're looking for some guidance, I can help you out a little." Still staring at the book, he stepped aside, giving me room to enter. Hesitantly, I did. What was meant to be a brief moment of rudeness to annoy Leo turned into a full-blown late-night study session. At some point, I grew tired, but Leo was so fired up I didn't know how to tell him I wanted to quit. Finally, by 2 in the morning, we called it a night. Exhausted, I shuffled back into my room and flopped onto the bed, falling asleep almost in an instant. If anyone was irritated, it was me. I'd lost precious hours of beauty sleep all for a test that I probably wasn't going to pass anyway. When I took the test and got it back 2 days later, I had a perfect score. It was probably the first time I'd ever gotten a perfect score in anything in school before, in my life. When I told Leo, he was ecstatic on my behalf. "That's fantastic," he said, grinning. "If you ever need help like that again, don't hesitate to ask. Helping you was very enjoyable. I learned a lot of interesting things." Just like before, he had happily helped me out. This was going to be harder than I had thought. That evening, when I told Megan everything that had happened so far, she laughed. "Wow, he must really like you." I huffed, irritated. "I don't get why he does. I've never done anything for him, but he's so eager to help me out with stuff. I don't get it." "I mean, weren't you just like that a few years back?" she asked. Which is why things ended up so bad, which she trailed off when she noticed how I was staring at her. Quickly, she clammed up, clearing her throat. Forget I said that." She smiled and leaned in closer to me. "If you really want to get him to stop liking you, though, I've got an idea." I raised a brow. "What? Why not bring him to Moxie's party tomorrow?" "What?" I laughed in disbelief and shook my head. "Oh, absolutely not. You know how her parties always end up. He couldn't handle that kind of thing." "Exactly," Megan pressed. "If you take him and he gets all uncomfortable, he's bound to get mad at you, right?" I glanced away, mulling over her words. "Well, you're right, but what?" Her voice was suddenly demanding. "Do you have a better idea or something?" I didn't. I wasn't comfortable with the idea at all, but it looked like it would do the job perfectly. After a few more seconds of thinking, I sighed. "Fine," I said, "but I'm keeping him away from drugs no matter what." Megan smirked. "You're a really nice guy, you know that?" She lightly patted my cheek with her fingers. I scoffed and batted them away. The next night. Moxie was famous on campus for her wild parties. Even Leo knew her, so when I asked him to go as my +1, he looked genuinely shocked. I had hoped he would decline the offer, but he hadn't. Instead, he had looked almost excited, as if happy I had invited him somewhere. Fine then, I thought. It looked like he was going to have to learn this lesson the hard way. The party was just as I had expected it, loud and full of people and substances. The bass coming from the loudspeakers was so deep it sank right into my bones. The air smelled of sweat. I really didn't know how Leo was going to react to being in such a place. To be honest, I was worried. Even though I knew it was against the whole purpose of inviting him, I couldn't help but hang around him when we first arrived. He stood by the wall awkwardly, nursing a cup of juice. I stayed nearby just to make sure no one would try to sell him anything. As I chatted with my friend, I heard familiar laughter. I froze. Feeling a sense of dread, I turned my head. Sure enough, there he was. He was standing nearby, his arm wrapped around the waist of a random girl. It had been over 2 years since I had last seen him, but I would recognize Ken's face anywhere. For a second, his eyes met mine. Then he looked away as if he hadn't seen me. My anger flared as I moved through the party to find Moxie. She was on some random guy's lap when I did. "Hey, Xander, what's up? You didn't tell me Ken was going to be here," I hissed. She stared at me, her gaze slightly unfocused. Someone probably invited him or something. I don't know. Are you still mad about what he did?" I cursed under my breath. "Of course I'm mad! He cheated on me!" Just from remembering it, I felt furious and humiliated all over again. I had fallen for Ken when I'd been in my first year, and he had been in my last. I had fallen for him hard, and from that experience, I had learned a lot of hard life lessons. One of them being, no matter how much you love someone, and no matter what you did to show them that love, you could very well still walk in on them in your bed, naked with someone else. I hadn't dated a single person since then. Knowing Moxie wasn't in the right state of mind to listen to me, I left, still steaming. I went back to where Leo had been standing, but he wasn't there anymore. Slightly panicked, I looked around, trying to find him. I spotted him near a crowd of people who looked like they were about to do something together. He looked nervous but excited. I weaved through the crowd, prepared to pull him away in case it was anything too much for him to handle, until I realized they were about to sing karaoke. Of course he would want to do that. I watched as Leo, not under the influence of any alcohol or substances, absolutely stole the show. In 30 minutes, he had done 3 songs and people were egging him on for an encore. Over time, he went from slightly nervous to fully confident, out-singing everyone there. I watched in fascination. I'd never seen this side of him before. Suddenly, he spotted me in the crowd. A slightly sheepish smile crossed his face, as if he was shy with me watching him. I scoffed slightly, rolling my eyes. But I was smiling. It looked like even this had failed in getting him to not like me. Well, if he was enjoying himself, I saw no reason to interrupt him. I turned and left, deciding I'd have something to drink. Before I could get far, though, someone stopped me by grabbing my shoulder. I turned and came face to face with Ken. I practically cringed away from him. "Oh, come on. Are you that pissed off that I'm here? I just want to talk to you, Zan. It's been a long time." His face was low and honey smooth. Just hearing it revolted me. "You'd better let go of me before I ruin your veneers." My voice was hot with anger. Thankfully, that was enough to get my feelings across. He let go of me and I retreated. I had to calm down. I didn't want to cause a scene. I headed to where the drinks were. 2 hours later. I didn't see Leo for a while after that. I was so angry for my encounter with Ken that I didn't have the mental energy to worry about him anymore. But despite how much I wanted to go home, I couldn't leave Leo there. So I focused my energy on getting drunk. Big mistake. I stood by the wall, deeply regretting my choices. Then, through the crowd, I spotted something that chilled me to my bones. There was Ken, and beside him, talking and laughing, was Leo. They looked casual and relaxed. Leo looked fully invested in the conversation, hanging on to Ken's every word. It might as well have been a mirror image of the first time I had talked to Ken, years ago. I felt a surge of rage so thick it almost made me sick. I didn't know when I crossed the room to reach them, but suddenly I was in front of them. And suddenly I was punching Ken right in the face. I heard gasps around me, and what sounded like Leo yelling my name. The voices were muffled, though. All I knew was that I needed to pass a message across to Ken. I was absolutely not going to let him go anywhere near Leo. What happened after that quickly became a blur. When I came to, I felt something warm underneath me. I was moving. No, I was being moved. After a second, I realized I was being carried on someone's back. I shifted slightly, confused. I realized my hands were draped around someone's neck. "Oh, are you awake, Xander?" It was Leo. My cheek was pressed against his shoulder from behind. It was late at night at that point, from the looks of the streets we were on. He was carrying me home. "Leo, what?" My tongue felt heavy in my mouth. You kind of passed out in there. Leo tightened his grip around my legs, leaning forward even more so I wouldn't fall off. I was surprised he could carry me so easily. How are you feeling? Put me down, I mumbled. Leo laughed. Don't think you can walk. I couldn't argue with that. Just how friggin' strong are you, man? Leo didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I heard about Ken. What happened between the both of you? I frowned. Screw that guy. If he comes near you again, I'll kill him. Normally, I wouldn't let my anger show so candidly, but under the influence, my emotions were fully out on display. Leo laughed again, softer. Don't worry. We won't be talking ever again. Thanks for looking out for me. I wasn't. His face just pissed me off, I mumbled. Leo didn't sound convinced. Well, thank you anyway. You probably stopped me from making a huge mistake. Hearing him say that unsettled me slightly. So, you would have gotten close to him if I hadn't beat him up? He seemed charismatic. I was open to becoming his friend. I scowled, silent. But, he continued, as far as dating goes, I still only like you. I blinked. Seriously? Why? Because you're a nice person, Xander. Leo's voice sounded even more earnest than usual. I laughed and shut my eyes. If you keep thinking like that, I'm gonna break your heart. I'll keep liking you until then, or at least until you tell me you don't like me back. Leo slowed until he stopped moving as if expecting my answer. Frowning slightly, I shut my eyes tighter and went still, pretending to fall asleep. When he didn't get an answer, Leo breathed out a sigh and continued to walk. Soon enough, I fell asleep for real. The next morning. Waking up the next morning was embarrassing. I remembered everything I had done and said the previous night, even though I really did not want to. Rumors were going to spread because of my outburst. People who knew my history with Ken might understand, but to anyone who didn't, I would just look jealous. After all, people had seen Leo and I arrive together. That alone was enough to raise a few eyebrows. And I wasn't jealous. I definitely wasn't jealous. I just didn't want Leo getting hurt in the same way I had. He was a sensitive guy. It would break him apart. As much as I wanted it to not be the case, I cared about him. I was worried about him. A guy as innocent and sincere as him was bound to get hurt by someone eventually. Remembering how much it had hurt for me, I didn't want him to go through that kind of thing. I sat in bed and groaned, rubbing a hand over my face. I could smell something good coming from the kitchen. It seemed Leo was busy. I wasn't sure how I was going to face him. Despite everything I had done, he still liked me. He probably liked me even more now, and it was getting close to the end of the month. It seemed I had no choice but to just tell him I didn't like him. Maybe he really would get over it as quickly as he said he would. Because you're a nice person, Xander. He said that to me last night. Would he really be able to get over me? I got out of bed and headed to the kitchen. Sure enough, he was in the process of making breakfast. French toast, it looked like. Morning. Sleep well? He asked, still facing what he was doing. Like a log. I stared at his wide back, remembering how he carried me on it. All the way home. Moxie's place was several minutes away, too. Hey, Leo? Yeah? Now is my chance. I just needed to tell him the truth, plain and simple. I don't like you. I just needed to say it. The truth. Thanks for yesterday, and for breakfast. Those were the words that came out of my mouth instead. No matter how I tried, I couldn't will myself to say what I really wanted to. No problem. Don't drink that much next time. You could get sick. Right. Helpless, I sat down at the table. It was the truth, so why couldn't I say it? It was the truth, wasn't it? I felt disbelief sink into me as I realized that it might not be. When Leo gave me my breakfast, I was barely able to eat. I'd spent all this time trying to get him to stop liking me instead of just rejecting him. Because I didn't want to have to deal with any leftover affection? No. It had been because I had not wanted to hurt him. Oh man, maybe I cared about him more than I had thought. Days later, I knew the time to give him an answer was coming, and I already knew the truth. The actual truth. Not what I had thought the truth had been. But even knowing that, what did it mean? He liked me, and somehow I had come to like him? What did that mean? We would start dating? Part of me didn't hate the idea, especially if it was Leo, but something in me hesitated. The last time I had opened up to someone like that, I had been badly hurt. Was I ready to risk experiencing that kind of pain again? Leo was out that night. I had Megan over, and not having anyone else to talk to, I opened up to her. Well, I didn't tell her the complete truth. See, I told you you were too nice. You don't even like him, but you're so worried about hurting him. I smiled awkwardly. I'd never hear the end of it if she found out that I actually liked him. Yeah. Megan paused, glancing out of the window. Then suddenly she walked over to me. I frowned, confused. Megan stepped even closer. She grabbed my shoulders, startling me. Hey, what are you doing? She smiled sweetly. You're being way too indecisive with this. I'll help you out a little. I didn't understand what she was saying. Then I heard footsteps approaching. I turned my head towards the door. Was that Leo? Before I could think of anything else, Megan yanked me forward. Her lips crashed into mine just as Leo opened the door. Her face was so close to mine I could smell the bubblegum on her breath, but my eyes were fixed on Leo. I saw his eyes widen. Megan pulled away for a second only to kiss me again, deeper this time. Leo looked shocked. Oh, sorry, I didn't know, I didn't mean to... Crap. He stepped back, smiling apologetically. I'll leave you guys to it. Sorry for barging in. Megan only released me when Leo had left. She stepped back, wiping her lips with the back of your hand. What the hell? I stepped away from her, shocked and borderline disgusted. Are you crazy? Maybe. Sorry if it was that sudden, she smiled behind her hand. But now you don't have to worry anymore, right? You can just forget about him. You know, since you don't like him. I was sick of hearing you talk about him all the time. And she was right. With this, he would definitely have to give up on me. I had the chance to let this end once and for all. But I couldn't. All I could think about was the look on his face when he saw us. I'd deal with Megan later. I bolted out the door and down the stairs, catching him just as he stepped outside. I grabbed him by the arm, stopping him. When he looked back at me, he looked startled. Leo, wait. My breathing was heavy. Leo smiled sadly. Sorry. I interrupted you, didn't I? I didn't know you and Megan were together. He looked like he was trying to hold it together. I could see that he was hurt, though. We're not! I don't even like her. She was just doing something stupid. Forget about that. Seriously, forget about it. I don't feel anything for her. He stared at me doubtfully. Why are you telling me that? It's none of my business whether or not you guys are together. I breathed in deeply. Megan's actions just now might have needlessly complicated things, but they were also the push I had been looking for. She had been right. I was being indecisive. It's your business because I still owe you an answer. Leo stared at me in disbelief. I steeled myself before blurting out. The truth is, I like you back. I was just worried and afraid that something would go wrong if I told you that. Leo's eyes had gone wide. I had to look away from him to keep going. But I like you back. Really? When Leo spoke, his voice was light. He sounded so relieved that I could only imagine how high his hopes had been, and how hard they had crashed just now. I was still nervous. Leo looked so happy to hear that I liked him back, and I didn't know how things were going to end up. I was worried that I wouldn't be a good partner for him at all. But if there was one thing I knew, it was that Leo was way smarter than me. So, trusting his judgment would probably be a good thing. Nearby, I heard someone laugh quietly. I glanced back and saw Megan standing by the entrance. God, finally! She rolled her eyes. Leo and I started to date shortly after. I allowed myself to fully embrace our relationship, trying my best to forget my worries. Despite my fears, our relationship ended up being loving and healthy, with our differences in personality balancing each other out. Despite the initial misunderstanding, Leo and Megan ended up becoming good friends. I didn't see Ken at all after the night of that party. Apparently, after my outburst that night, news of what he did to me spread to those who had not already known. People were advised to not spend any time with him, especially seeing as he continued to hang out with college kids even after he had already graduated. He quickly got labeled as creepy and was shunned. The end. What do you think is the best to tackle doubts and fears that come from past failed relationships? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force and stay wholesome.